Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through my top new fantasy releases from the first quarter of the year. As usual, within the first quarter I let myself pick up new fantasy releases from the previous year just because the year's only just begun, and a lot of things, especially within January, aren't even out yet, or access to those things isn't amazing because if you put a hold on something, you're not probably going to get that in from the library for a while. So I do allow myself to pick up things that I wanted to read from the previous year, which I'm so glad I continue to do that because two of the three books we're going to talk about today were technically 2024 releases. But the point is, moving forward, whenever I do a top new fantasy releases for the rest of this year, then we will only be sticking to things that have come out within 2025. Getting it out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and start with Blood Over Brighthaven. So I already did an in-depth non-spoiler review for this book. I've talked about it in a new fantasy releases wrap-up. I also then brought it up in some other videos as well. This is the new I'm not gonna stop talking about it book. This one and another one that is going to be in my best books of the year, which is separate from best new fantasy as it is about backlist works as well as other genres. But between this and that one, I do feel kind of bad because I try as much as possible to not be too repetitive with what I discuss, or when I'm bringing up books and I'm trying to provide helpful lists or things of that sort, I don't want to talk about the same things over and over again. It's actually why I'm somewhat resistant to doing wrap-ups at the end of every month, because I'm like, well, I mean, I've already talked about these things. So I'm so sorry because I've talked about Blood Over Brighthaven so much already this year, as have a lot of other people, because this has kind of taken people by storm, which excites me greatly because this is one of those stories where I thought it was amazing and the hype makes me so happy for this author because I think that they deserve it. If you don't know anything about Blood Over Brighthaven, though, the setup for the story is that you follow this young woman who is definitely an underdog when it comes to the fact that she has an immense amount of knowledge and skill when it comes to their magic system, which if you like more scientific sounding magic systems, ones with rules and limitations, especially ones that are studied within a school setting, you're probably really going to enjoy the magic within this. But she has a lot of knowledge when it comes to this. She has the potential to essentially become this high mage figure within their society. However, their society is very oppressive, especially toward women, so she has to really push to try and prove herself in a society that if she were just a different gender, she would not have to put in the same amount of work. But you do find that as a result of sort of that, you want to root for the underdog character, you're rooting for her initially, but she's also got her sharp edges and she has her blind spots, and you explore that through another character in the story who ends up somewhat becoming her assistant. There's so much when it comes to the complexities of their society, when it comes to how societies can be oppressive and how just because you might be put down in certain areas doesn't mean that you aren't also putting other people down and utilizing certain privileges as a result of the work of other people and the oppression of other people. It explores those things fantastically. It explores propaganda, institutions of power. It does so much so exceptionally, and it does so through the lens of a borderline villainous character. I really, really appreciated that the author did not pull any punches when it came to showcasing the ugliest sides of this character, the ugliest sides of their society. It made for some moments that were really difficult to read because you just felt yourself essentially cringing from the way that she would think and act at times, and just the way that people in general think and act in the story. But you also appreciate it because you don't really want your stories, if they're meant to reflect things as they've been in the past or how they are now, to really try to sugarcoat things. You want to actually be faced with the reality, or at least I do in the stories I pick up. Depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm like, I need to escape all of this, hence why escapism is a thing. But I really just felt like this book was exceptional in every way. I thought it was well paced. I thought that the characterization was fantastic. I thought that the magic was really intricate and interesting, and there was a lot of twists and turns throughout the story. It was fantastic. Like I said, I'm not going to stop talking about this book because I thought it was so good. I'll try to rein it in. I promise. I'll try to hold back a little bit. Next up, we have the conclusion of a trilogy. Blood Over Brighthaven was a standalone, so this one is the third in a series, and that would be Trials of Empire. As a result of it being the third book in a series, I do feel like I can't say too many specifics about this one, but I can kind of speak of the trilogy as a whole. This is a series that I feel is somewhat, in its writing style, reminiscent of Joe Abercrombie, in that it is very much rooted, I would say, in grimdark. However, there are the occasional funny moments. And what I think makes this one separate is that it's not quite as funny, it's not as baked in to have the humor throughout a lot of the story. There isn't this sort of sarcasm present in everything. However, when the funny moments strike, they are exceptionally funny. But then also, this story is a genre bender in that it mixes elements of fantasy and grimdark fantasy specifically with horror, which is such a perfect combination. I'm actually surprised either I'm ignorant to potentially how much this combination has been done already, or I'm surprised that it hasn't been done more often, because grimdark fantasy and horror, they just feel like a combination that you would expect to go together more often, and I really feel that Richard Swan combined these two really, really well. The setup initially, and you've probably heard me talking about this one as well, just in the very nature of I've read through the whole trilogy, so anytime I bring up the series, I end up talking about it, but you follow a character who is the protege to Sir Conrad von Valt, who is judge, jury, executioner, and detective all in one, and the story really pushes back on the idea of one individual holding that much power, but then also the ways that when you don't have somebody being able to make the decisions and having the power to back it up, just how much everything grinds to a halt. And then it's kind of this back and forth constantly about understanding law and power, the letter of the law, all of these different things that I thought were fantastic. It's also got a lot of commentary on just the ways that we see power, the way that we view groups of people who have the ability to make change, and the sort of inherent greatness that we decide they have and wisdom that we decide that they have and that we grant them. But then also when you kind of peel back the curtain and you take a look at what really is going on, it is often much darker than you would ever imagine, and there's so much control that is also part of the ways that these societies work. It's fantastic. The horror elements become more present the further into the story you get, as part of the magic in this is rooted in necromancy. If you are somebody who likes more of that kind of dark magic, then there's definitely a chance that you'll enjoy this. One thing that I don't disagree with necessarily is there are some criticisms about the main character, Helena, as she is very young when the story starts, and the way that it's framed is that you understand that Helena has survived the events of this trilogy, as she is an elderly woman now, and so occasionally she sort of chimes in from present day and will reflect on her behavior, but you're also seeing her when she is younger in this time, and she has a lot to learn. She kind of has a chip on her shoulder, she is somewhat irrational sometimes, and what I think makes it more bearable is her own acknowledgement of, I was a little hot-headed in this moment, that sort of idea, but doesn't change the fact that she can be kind of frustrating. I'm realizing now in talking about Blood Over Bright Haven and this one, I'm like, do I have a thing for unlikable characters? I mean, I don't know that I do, because I really love the character Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke, and he's about as perfect as they come. But I do think that both of the authors of these first books that I'm talking about today, they really explore unlikable characters, characters that have room to grow, characters that they're trying for something, they're trying to make something of themselves, but then also they are a product of their society, and they're starting to question things, and then they're maturing and changing, and I always really enjoy characters that are like that, especially when those kinds of characters are done very, very well. As noted, the first two books were actually releases from 2024. This last one was released from this year, and I do think that Blood Over Bright Haven and Trials of Empire, they for me were maybe a little cut above when I try to think of new fantasy that I enjoyed just as much as those two. I don't know that I really found too many within the first quarter quite hit as strong, but there were so many things about this next book that I'm going to talk about that I thought were really, really great, that I thought it was worth mentioning and having it in this top 3, and that would be Green Teeth. So I do feel that my major criticism for this one, and it's not even that big of a deal, it's just kind of the one thing that I would say held this back from really being something that I fell head over heels in love with, is that I actually think it got a little too big for itself towards the end of the story, but as I already stated, the things that it did well were so exceptional and so refreshing too to see. Setup for the story is that you follow Jenny, who is this being that maintains this one little area where it is a body of water, and she very much makes it clear it's not a swamp, and she maintains it so that it's nice and pristine, and she takes care of it, and she has obviously lived for centuries and centuries, and she mostly keeps to herself. Even though she does have the means to communicate with humans, she mostly stays away from them. However, she essentially has no say in resisting contact with people when a woman is literally thrown into her lake, and it is discovered very quickly that this woman is being accused of being a witch, hence why she was thrown into this lake, and she was meant to drown. And so Jenny rescues her and also starts to learn her life story, and her life story is devastating. There was somebody who came into their very small village who started turning everybody against each other, and this is what led to them all deciding that this woman was a witch, mostly in the fact that she had some magical abilities that she mostly just used for small things to do with healing and trying to ensure that crops grew, and something very innocent and wholesome and nice, but people decided, because of this newcomer who has shifted their perspective on things, that she must be evil and that she must be taken out. And she has a husband and children, and she so desperately wants to get back to them, to be there for them. She can only imagine what her children are going through without her. They're very, very young. She feels so bad for her husband, so she wants them to know she's alive, but she's also very fearful of going back into the village and facing their wrath again. Jenny is really moved by this, and she's like, I'm going to help you. Very quickly determined that the newcomer is not what initially meets the eye, and perhaps they are actually a force of evil, so it's not going to be quite as easy to infiltrate the village again and run away with her husband and her children. And this leads Jenny and this woman to go on this long quest and this journey to try and figure out how to take out this evil. And the things that I thought it did really well were especially rooted in the friendship dynamics in the story. I thought that was probably the standout feature of this. Seeing the way that these two characters get to know each other, they get in fights with each other, they're annoyed by each other, they want to help each other. All of those things were so wholesome and so nice to see. But also just knowing that our main character is somebody in a loving family as well. I feel like so much of fantasy is everybody's home life is awful, or they have no family or anything, or things of that sort. And it was just nice to see a character who her husband loves her and she loves her children and they all want to just be a happy family together, and you're like, I want them to be a happy family together too. And it kind of forces you to be pulled in and sucked in because you want to root for them. As I said, I do feel like this book got a little bit big for what it started out as. It is a standalone, or at least currently, I don't know if the author ever plans to write more, but it is on the shorter side, and I think it started out and for a lot of the story maintained a more contained feeling, and then toward the end it got really, really big. Not really a huge detriment to the story, it was just, like I said, the one thing that kind of kept it from being an absolute standout on the same level as something like Blood Over Bright Haven. It's just kind of a different sort of story. I would almost categorize this as cozy, and I think it could absolutely be considered cozy fantasy. It's just perhaps not as stagnant, because a lot of cozy fantasy sort of takes a place in this one little area, and the setting is cute and charming, and you only really have a couple characters, and it's lower stakes. This one does have higher stakes. It is more of a traveling story. It's sort of a quest story. So for those reasons, it's kind of right on the edge, but it was quite delightful, and it really felt like a new grim fairy tale story. That's it for some top new fantasy releases picked up in the first quarter of the year. A lot of my most anticipated releases are projected to be released in this second quarter, so I am ecstatic for what's to come, and I think it'll be really fun toward the end of the year to look back on all of the new fantasy and compare them to each other. I really hope that my anticipated releases live up to the hype that I've maybe got for them, but we'll see. Of course, that's to come. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.